The next section will be very interesting with Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Who will be introducing him will be Dr. Paul Johnson, who is the 17th president of Colorado School of Mines. Dr. Johnson began his career at Shell Development in Houston, Texas. He then joined the faculty at Arizona State and later the Colorado School of Mines. There you are. Yep. And Dr. Johnson is on the Collaboratories Authority Board, and as you know, the Collaboratory is the host of this session. So please welcome Dr. Johnson.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're extremely fortunate today, not one governor, but two, right? Or maybe more in the audience that I didn't even know about. So we probably have a higher per capita governors than most other technical meetings do, so this is pretty cool. For those of you who aren't from Colorado, anybody who's here knows who this next speaker is going to be. We're very, very fortunate to have here Governor John Hickenlooper. He says former geologist, but once you're a geologist, you're always a geologist, so you don't get the former part. Geologist and entrepreneur who recently added author to his resume with the publication of his memoir, The Opposite of Woe, My Life in Beer and Politics, which, if you go to Amazon, is rated 4.5 stars this morning, and it's available on Kindle and everything. Since taking office in 2011, the governor and his team have endeavored to make Colorado the most pro-business state with the highest environmental and ethical standards. And I think as a new sort of Colorado person here in the state, I can tell you we're very, very fortunate to have a governor that actually sort of represents the state so well. So geologist, beer, rides bikes, and if you read reviews of his books, I'm just going to read a short one. He's an exemplary personification of the best qualities associated with his boomer generation. Learned, diverse, multicultural, self-empowering, entrepreneurial, passionate about social justice, and committed to being a change agent. So please join me in welcoming Governor John Hickenlooper.
Actually, I used to say I'm a recovering geologist, which is the implication the same as you alluded to, that once you're a geologist, you never stop being a geologist. I did get I spent this last weekend in Lander, Wyoming, which is just south. It's about 100 miles south of where I did my field research. My field research in volcanic rocks just north of Yellowstone Park. And it was just to get a tingle of what my old life was and how different it was both good and bad. Thank you for the introduction, Paul, and for all the work you're doing at Mines. Mines is just like this incredible enterprise here in Boulder and throughout the state with CU. It's a great resource that we have. I'm a little nervous having Bill Ritter here, just because in the old days, I was in the private sector and he spent most of his life in the public sector and did, worked for the public good again and again. So I always felt a little more worldly, and that I kind of had my finger on the pulse of things. And then I was the mayor and he was the governor. Governor doesn't get out as much. And again, as the mayor, I was kind of, you're filling potholes. It's a very granular job. In many ways, much more pleasing than being governor, if I can say that bluntly. So now I've been governor for 6 years, and he's been out changing the world. And so now I am the one who's really feels like I'm not quite completely in touch with the details and the daily strife of the workaday world. And I keep having people coming and saying, have you heard what Bill Ritter's working on? Do you understand what he got done in North Dakota, South Dakota? He's got all these different states together, and he's really focused on making it pragmatic and granular so that it's not partisan, Republicans and Democrats. He's avoided all the pitfalls that have gotten in the way so frequently behind. And it's gotten to the point where every time someone says that to me now, I look at them and say, yes, isn't it amazing? The man's a magician. It's incredible. Just kidding. Also honored to have Lynn Orr here and appreciate greatly his work on the national level of really looking at how do you create a collaboratory approach to the energy challenges that we face. Obviously, there are daunting challenges, and despite innovations on a global level, we continue to have accelerating demand, and certainly on a global level, that's going to continue no matter how more efficient we become. The changes in infrastructure are significant. A lot of them reflect innovations of one form or another. I don't think there's too much argument anymore that it's a very good idea to shift towards cleaner and lower carbon emissions in terms of our energy, and then also finding ways to bring our best and most effective and efficient technologies to scale. Number of polls that I've seen over the last 6 months generally look at the two global challenges that I hear or I see at the top of almost every poll are climate change and then cyber technology, cybersecurity. And climate change certainly has perhaps the longer, the deeper roots. Bill Gates, when I saw him speak a couple years ago, and he said, the problem's not really that big a deal. We just have to find a system that's as reliable as our present energy system, a system that's as cost-effective and affordable as our present system, and with no carbon emissions. And he says, and he laughs, and then he said, but we could do that if we were able to work together. We're able to figure out the systems necessary for collaboration at scale. Because I think any new system to have any impact has got to be able to scale globally. That increase, and this is taking into account the efficiencies of innovation, but by 2040 we'll have energy consumption up over 50%. I've seen estimates between 50 and 60%. If you look at what we've done in the last 10 years and really in the last 5 years, the average price of wind has fallen dramatically, and you guys know this probably better than I do, over 56% from 2009 to 2014. And over that same period, from 2009 to 2014, solar dropped by over 78%. Solar and wind have had the largest capacity additions in 2015 nationwide. They added 8,000 megawatts of wind last year, so that was over 40% of all the capacity expansion. This year they're expecting 9,500 megawatts of solar. At the same time, we've seen innovations continue around our access to natural gas. And this is, as a geologist, it's so dramatically different than any previous way geologists have thought about harvesting energy resources, in that the innovation of directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing is an ongoing self-perfecting innovation. And so it's not like discovering a giant field, an elephant somewhere, where all of a sudden you've got all these reserves and then those reserves are going to decline. I was talking to a couple of geologists from a relatively small company in Colorado, and they think in the last 3 years that they've reduced the cost of accessing hydrocarbons by over 30% in just 3 years, through taking the directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing and using it to be even more, just continuing to improve it and add innovation upon innovation, which, again, if I thought about it properly, I should have realized that when I first started hearing about it 15 years ago. I think even the challenge here is even natural gas adds to the climate difficulties we face, and in many arguments, I think we're getting better and better. Colorado is the first state where we actually imposed statewide operational regulations that allowed us to regulate methane emissions and dramatically cut down on fugitive emissions, to the point where, every well, at this point, we've gone to every single gas well in the state multiple times, and will continue to do so until there are no emissions. But I think that still doesn't get us where we need to go. We are going to need natural gas, I think, as a bridge fuel. I get a lot of heat from my friends in the environmental movement when I say that, but it's going to play a significant role. Every model I've seen, and I'm sure people here have different models that they can show me, but the models I've seen that are most credible are going to require a significant amount of natural gas as a transitional fuel before we get to a clean economy. I love it, and I always say that because usually that just, I want to make sure the environmentalists have something to attack me on, because otherwise I'm, too much on one side or the other. I always feel more comfortable if I have both sides doing a little bit of attacking. Colorado, we had the first renewable energy standard passed by voters in the country. In 2004, 1% of our electricity was from renewable sources. 2014, renewables accounted for 15%. By 2020, our largest utility, Xcel Energy, will produce 30% of its power from clean and renewable sources. At one point in time last year, wind generated 67% of Xcel's energy for that 1 hour period, which I think is the highest rate anywhere in the country. But I think we can expect those hours to happen more frequently as we begin to scale other projects and facilities in the state. Obviously, the challenges we have around wind, the intermittency, issues around storage. A lot of you, I think, in the room are working on that. I had dinner 2 weeks ago with Governor Sandoval of Nevada, who's a strong conservative Republican who is investing more money into battery storage and research and electric cars than probably any Democratic governor in the country, and really does see it as that the innovation in the battery storage is going to tremendously disrupt the automobile industry, even as the autonomous vehicles begin to wreak havoc or at least change people's conception of how vehicles are supposed to function. The common denominator for all this stuff is innovation and collaboration. And in many ways, you can have innovation without collaboration, but you sacrifice scale and you sacrifice impact. Almost all of these transformations are still being driven by markets. There are incentives on a number of different levels, but we have a fairly robust coal industry in this state, and we are right now actively working on a process by which we're going to figure out how to go to those communities and provide them the basic tools like redundant high-speed broadband access and other incentives to help them transition, because coal, forget about the issues around climate change, it cannot compete anymore with natural gas, let alone wind and I think soon solar. So when you put into that in the context of the climate imperative, I think if we can move to a low-carbon electrical system effectively, why wouldn't we? I think there's this notion that we have to sacrifice economic growth for environmental protection is a joke. Certainly there are abundant jobs, and when Governor Ritter created I always call it the first clean power plan, but worked to pass legislation in the state of Colorado by which we were going to maybe a little more rapidly mothball some of the coal plants. One of the things that got talked about all the time, that he talked about effectively, I think, was the number of jobs that are going to come out of clean tech. In 2015 was the fastest growing industry in the region. And I think by being able to leverage market forces, and this is someone who's been an entrepreneur, I was in the private sector for the better part of 20 years, I think when you are able now as someone in the both feet in the public sector, when you're able to leverage market forces, you know that things are going to go faster and they're probably going to go better. We do need affordable, reliable energy. It's a public good, but we need to support that with smart regulatory frameworks and infrastructure and continued and expanding investment in R&D. Obviously, by expanding that funding for R&D, governments can stimulate innovation. And certainly the public-private partnerships like the Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory is a great model. And again, I think the the public sector can play a role in convening and incentivizing that kind of collaboration. I think this region has some amazing innovation resources. Los Alamos Natural Laboratory, where when I first was a young geologist and went down there, and I couldn't believe what a beautiful place. I mean, part of what, at that time, what drove me to want to be a scientist so badly was I thought someday I'd get to be in Los Alamos or the Sandia National Lab, where people got to sit and think and invent. Obviously, NRAIL here in Colorado is a big part of this. The Idaho National Lab is going to have a significant role. If you begin to add all these labs up, there are hundreds of R&D 100 awards, and literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of the top researchers in the world. There's a diverse research portfolio, security and resilience of infrastructure, cutting-edge nuclear research on what the future could look like, carbon sequestration and storage, not to mention improving carbon energy efficiency and renewable energy efficiency. You tie those federal labs in with the top research universities that we have in the region, and you really begin to see the kinds of collaborations that can come out of it. We had a recent Department of Energy grant recipient, Solar Dynamics. It's developing concentrating solar power systems that can replace peaking natural gas power plants. But I would argue, and I think most of you are here, that we need to scale up the collaboration. The Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory is a great model for this. State investment was $8 million, leveraged into nearly $100 million with resources from DOE and NSF and industry and others. The economic impact was over $200 million around it. And I think, taking things like the methane regulations that I referred to earlier and really improving the detection of methane leaks, and then the measurement that goes with that detection, so you know exactly what you're dealing with, has moved so much more rapidly. I was talking to a couple of the senior executives for Anadarko and for Noble Energy, who were partners in that methane regulation process. And their expectations of cost to really go out there and be able to monitor every well and be able to begin to measure and find and detect leaks, each year the cost comes down at a level much faster. The cost has been much less than what they had originally anticipated. Anyway, each of these regional innovation and hopefully collaborative ecosystems have specific regional strengths. And I think by bringing them together and finding different pathways by which you can enhance that collaboration, you can nurture the diversity of resources, harness the regional potential around energy, and at the same time make sure that we uphold the highest standards for public health. And in that process, make sure we protect the environment. I think, in a funny way, that what's going on in this regional collaborative environment is probably part of the inspiration that we are going to solve this, and that in the end, we're going to find ways to have energy, as Bill Gates envisioned, as inexpensive and as reliable, but without all the carbon emissions that we have to deal with this today. So I guess on that sense, I get to thank each of you for all your work on this, and to congratulate you on, you're a long way from getting to the finish line, but you certainly have gotten a lot done. So on behalf of the state of Colorado, thank you. I appreciate it.
We do have time for questions, Governor Hickenlooper. If you have a question, please raise your hand.
There's one in the back, and that's always the most dangerous types of questions.
So what I've read is that an overwhelming number of the tax credits and subsidies that have gone to renewable energy have gone to the very wealthy in the form of subsidizing electric cars or solar on a single-family home. Is there any direction towards or ideas towards subsidizing or trying to get these benefits to the greater community, I guess, the greater population, people who can't necessarily afford to put solar panels on a 5,000 square foot home or buy a Tesla, for example?
First, I think those innovations that happen for the benefit of the wealthy, if done properly, always lead to innovations that trickle down. In other words, soon you're going to have electrical cars. They're talking about having electrical cars by the end of next year at $20,000 or $24,000, much more affordable still for truly working poor, not doing them much good. Most people I've worked with around energy look at the absolute cheapest and cleanest energy that we can find is insulation and other forms of energy conservation. The state of Colorado, and I think almost all of our neighboring states, still have programs in that on that effort, but they have been cut back. Colorado, our weatherization programs for the low-income communities are largely dependent upon severance taxes that we receive for oil and gas production, which have gone down dramatically in the last couple of years based on, again, market-driven economies due to the price of natural gas and oil. But they're still in effect, and we've been actually trying to look at what would be other ways of paying for that to make sure that it's not that all the incentives and government effort aren't always going towards the top of the food chain.
Another question over here?
Hello, Dan Powers with CoLabs. We can all reach out to our state representatives and describe what our organizations and individually we think should happen. What would you like to see come out of the next session of the state legislature to help empower the vision you just described?
Well, I think one of the keys for, and I think this notion of getting regional groups of states to work together is very powerful. And I think the work that Bill Ritter's done, I may tease him about it, but it is some of the more valuable work, because once you get the synergy of different efforts, combined, you really do get a dramatic and almost an order of magnitude change in terms of what the kind of benefits you'll get from innovation. That starts with more resources from the local government funding, and more. And it's not just in energy, but in different parts of the federal government, they are going to look for more local funding for everything. The gasoline tax is not sufficient even to maintain our roads, let alone provide for new transportation infrastructure in the way that it used to. And the Department of Transportation, I don't think this is a big mystery or surprise, but they're going to expect and look for, until that time when there's a different form of, or a source of revenues in the Department of Transportation, they're going to be looking towards local states and metropolitan areas to step up and play a larger role in generating their, taking a larger match in the resources necessary. So state legislatures, the challenge there always is at the state level, and this isn't true in every state, but it's true in pretty much every purple state, they will do everything they can to avoid ever missing an opportunity to make a partisan issue. And especially around energy, almost no matter what you say, they will, they'll come at you. And we have working on a draft, executive order around energy just for the state of Colorado. And within and again, it's not like the governor of Colorado is the opposite of the president of the United States in terms of the actual authority that the governor of Colorado has. I can't change the rules. I can't compel utilities to come to one goal or another. It's all going to have to go through formal rulemaking, and it'll have to go through legislation. Anything we do. But when I've talked about raising, saying that, and I boxed this. I put this inside parentheses that said, given that we are going to, let's set an assumption that we're not going to pay more for our electricity either to our consumers' homes or to our businesses, and that cost of electricity won't rise by more than, let's say, 2% or inflation, whichever is less. How much carbon emissions can we get rid of? Seems a logical question to ask. Well, on a statewide basis, they went berserk. And for the life of me, don't see anything partisan about it. Just to say, all right, for the same cost, how much cleaner can our energy be? We're at a mile high. Particulates and ozone affect us more severely than they do in other climates in other regions. Should this be to try and get cleaner air for the same price? Is this somehow a partisan issue? But it was as if as if I'd snatched away children from their mothers. Anyway, I think there's a lot of work to be done in state legislatures just to begin to kind of try to do the honest, hard work of listening. And I think that's certainly any success I've had with the state legislature has not come from going and telling them what they needed to do, what I knew was right, but what has come from taking the time to really listen harder to what their concerns were. Sometimes those concerns will boggle your mind, that's actually why they're opposing something. But I think organizing and approaching state legislatures with that kind of open, I'm going to listen, I'm going to hear you out, I'm really going to listen and respond to that, is probably our best hope, certainly around energy for sure.
We have time for one more.
Or I'll be quicker this time. There are two. There's a question there and a question there. I have 2 minutes and 59 seconds. We'll see if I can make it. I love these clocks. It's so good.
My name is Arthur Nozick. I'm both at NREL and at the university here in Boulder. During the panel discussion previously to your talk, an issue that came up was public acceptance of the reality of climate change and the need to decarbonize our energy system. And I think the way this should be handled is through education. And the question is, what can Colorado do in terms of public education to educate the young people about the reality of climate change and the need to decarbonize? It's based on science, it's factual. We're running out of time. There's very good analysis showing that unless we do something about reducing emissions, we're going to be stuck with unacceptable levels of global warming. So can Colorado set the example for the country? I know that in Boulder, there's a wide acceptance of the
Yes.
reality, but
Boulder does not exactly represent Colorado. But I guess here's how I'd answer that. And I think that Colorado has as good a university, a set of universities. I mean, CSU in Fort Collins, CU, Mines, University of Denver, these are powerful schools that are doing a lot of that work. But there are real challenges. And I had a couple of Republicans call me up over the weekend. They said, "Did you see that story about the ice in the Arctic?" I said, "Yeah, it's the worst it's been in 40 years. Or it's the most melted and open in 40 years." And he goes, "Exactly. 40 years ago, it was just like it is now." Well, and so there's enough rhythm and perturbations in our natural cycles of weather. Some of them are very long cycled rhythms, and that creates skepticism. And Lord knows we've seen millions of times where scientists have been wrong, right? When I first became a geologist, continental drift, right? It was unaccepted. It was a joke. How could you ever think continental drift would be real? And then all of a sudden, all the scientists changed. So I think it's the same thing. You just got to listen. We've got to work harder. And those universities, trust me, are trying to get the basic facts out there again and again. Last question, and I'll be very quick because I've got 13 seconds.
Sue Haupt, National Center for Atmospheric Research. This morning we heard on a panel that, from Xcel Energy actually, that it is easier to integrate renewables when there is a larger balancing area. Sure. We also heard that the California ISO is working to expand and help bring that balancing area throughout the West, but it's being limited by the California legislature wanting to control things. So the question is, can organizations like the Western Governors Association really work together to try to alleviate that issue and really try to make balancing a little bit more easy in the West?
And that's a great question, because it is, legislatures, not just in Colorado or not just in California, but legislatures do desire to play a larger role. And it's no longer the way it was, I think, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. They want more and more control. Maybe I'm biased, I think governors are the solution. I think Western governors, we're in the process of integrating water plans now in the West. Governor Rear's been working with, I don't know, you're working 10 governors, right? 13 governors, all in the West, looking at how you integrate those plans. Governors, generally, we get along great, right? The Western Governors Association, the chair is a Republican right now. The next chair, the vice chair, is a Democrat, and they rotate every year. Same with the National Governors Association. So if there's any hope for mankind, it's in governors. No, I'm just kidding. That's a... But they are, the buck stops on at your desk, and I think governors are willing to take more risk and go out there and lead a little harder in terms of finding efficiencies and talking to people and beginning to move that consciousness of their states in a more appropriate fashion in terms of dealing with energy. But it's tough. The legislatures, there's so many people so unhappy with government right now that the legislatures, many people view the legislatures as their only protection. Whether it's a Republican governor or a Democratic governor. So that's the challenge. Anyway, you guys keep up the good work. Very, very, very impressed by all the work that's represented in this room, and very excited about all that you're going to get done in the future.
Please thank Governor Hickenlooper.